Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of This, That and the Other. My name is Varun Chandramohan, your host for today. Seated next to me is the man behind the hit YouTube channel Business Guru with over 300,000 views under his name. He's a trainer at Luminary and my co-host for the day, Sam. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Varun. It's a great pleasure.
Awesome. And I hope you're ready for today's episode. We have a really distinguished panel.
I'm very excited.
Awesome. So This, That and the Other is a series that tackles some of the biggest, most controversial challenges HR and senior managers face within an organization. And the series isn't your usual webinar. It's part talk show, part podcast. And so far we've covered topics ranging from affairs at work, the good, bad and the ugly, and side hustles while being employed, a perspective from both the employers and the employees side. This week, however, we'll be looking at success in business. Is it down to strategy, pure luck, or a little bit of both? And to our audience tuning in today, do send in your questions, comments, and even feedback by clicking on the chat button on Microsoft Teams at any time during the next hour. And it's time to introduce our guest, and what a lineup we have today. She is an attorney at law, the current business development director at Saline. Selena Pete is here with us today. Hello, Selena.
Hi, Varun. Hi, everyone. Pleased to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And he is the managing director at Heka PLC and a director at Haley's PLC. Rajitha Karyavasan is here today, everyone. Hello, Rajitha.
Hi, nice to be here. Good afternoon, everyone.
Awesome, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And finally, he is the Chief Operating Officer at MAS and a mentor to Vidusha, the founder of Luminary Learning Solution. Shirendra Lawrence is here with us today. Hello, Shirendra.
Hi, Varun. Hi, Sam. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, the pleasure is ours. Thank you for joining us today. All right, let's dive in. So, Selena, you run an extremely successful, medium-sized, family-owned, family-run business. And Shirendra, you are the COO of a large, family-owned, professionally run conglomerate. And Rajitha, you are the managing director of a public limited company and a director at one of the largest diversified public conglomerates in the country. So from your individual perspective, what does it truly take to become successful in business? And what role does strategy play in it? Shirendra, any thoughts on what it truly takes to become successful? Because I think Selena did touch on luck a little bit, and she did touch on the pandemic and how it took us all by surprise. I mean, the experts were warning us. I mean, it was a matter of when and not if, but surely this must have been something that just sort of came out of nowhere. So Shirendra, your thoughts on what it takes to be successful, strategy's role, and maybe throw in a little bit of luck in there, and what do you think about it?
So thanks, Varun. From my point of view, I would say that certainly, is it luck or strategy? Both play very important roles in how businesses either succeed or don't. I think strategy is something you probably can plan a little bit better than you can luck. So maybe just talk about that for a moment first. I think developing a business strategy is super important, and actually as organizations go bigger, more complex, become global, these become more and more challenging as the leadership distances itself from the action. So it's important to take time, sit back, and it is a process that we have to go through. I think all successful business leaders do this either informally, particularly in the small companies, and then as the companies become larger, it becomes more formal, maybe using theoretical models, so on and so forth. And I think probably the most successful leaders use a combination of formal and informal. For me, certainly in my lifetime, I've felt that it's important to take time out, generally with senior leadership, at least once a year, maybe biannually, to reflect on the past, to assess how things went in relation to the plans that were set out, to try and understand what impact external forces had on our progress. And I'm a strong believer that reflection is the best way of learning anyway. So taking time out and reflecting is really important. And I've always used these opportunities to also bond the teams, where get away from the workplace, move to an environment where you're not being disturbed, have a couple of days together. Also breaks down some of the other challenges that you come across during the course of day-to-day business. And then when you're doing this process, I think assessing as you look forward, assessing your current positioning as an organization, strengths and weaknesses and how those are playing in the market, how the market itself is performing, how your customers are doing in the market, and then understanding the forces that will impact you and going through them one by one, whether it's competition, supply chain, and so on and so forth. And using all of those, either define, or if you already have a business strategy, refine it and adjust it, because we all know that today, nothing is certain and things will move, and you need to be able to flex on it and so on. And there are lots of business models for this. For me, I think Professor Michael Porter's work is simple and easy to understand. And I've always used him as someone to, and there's some great videos online, simple, easy videos to learn. So I think, yes, strategy is super important. And I think at the same time, constantly reviewing the sort of the vision, the mission of your corporation and the goals is equally important, because if those have to change, and it's best that those aren't changed too frequently, then it makes sense to, obviously you have to edit your strategy to go with that. But then coming to luck, it's probably a little bit more, that one I actually had to think a little harder about, because if you look at the clinical dictionary definition, it tends to focus on pure forces and events that will bring you good or bad fortune. For me, I think though luck in terms of a business context is equally as much as that as to what you actually make of it. So, I mean, trying to disseminate it a little bit, I think the first part of being prepared to deal with luck is that overall strategy that we just talked about, and then building in place a contingency planning process and having all that in place. That's all equally part of strategy and blends into the being prepared for an eventuality, doing risk assessments within your organization in how you would deal with different situations. Again, both formally and informally, I think that preparedness is probably the first lever that I would say is worth looking at, or the first pillar you would look at. Secondly, I think everybody thinks of luck as right place, right time, and I absolutely agree that is the case. But at the same time, if you just sit by, it'll just go past you. So watching and listening for the signs of something is also important, because luck can play positive or negative. And then at the same time, you don't want to miss the bus. If the luck is positive, you have to make sure you jump on the bandwagon. Others will if you don't. And if the luck is perceived to be bad luck, as we talked about with the pandemic, well, there's always going to be winners and losers. Someone is going to come out of this in a better place, and someone will come out in a worse place. So then the planning process and how you deal with it is important. I think the third lever or pillar I would look at is the whole mindset. Have a positive mindset. Again, luck, whether it's things going right or wrong, can be good or bad depending on how you look at it. And I think sort of the analogy of look at the glass as half full but as half empty, and actually figure out how you fill it up is a good one in this place. And certainly let's make the best out of a good crisis, never let it go past. I think that's something you have to, as a leader, you have to be positive about. And then I think finally I'd say the fourth one would be the ability to flex, because when luck happens, it's less planned, and you have to be ready to flex. So I think situational leadership, motivating, directing, inspiring all the people around you to rise to the occasion and make the best of it is important. And you have to be strong. You have to be resilient from a leadership point of view. It comes with a lot of pressure. Try and contain that as best as possible. We all know that under certain pressure conditions we perform well, but if you let it go too far, then you can break down, and you don't want your teams around you to sense that. It'll dilute the confidence that you may be building, sustain your energy levels through it, and deal with setbacks, because you will have setbacks. So I think those are the sort of four ways I would say is looking at luck and what makes what is able to make you make the best of it or be a loser through that process. And I think the most important thing through all of this process when you're leading an organization with a large number of people is communicate. I mean, communication is super important. Just to touch on an example, and Selena talked about the current crisis, so I'll try and take a step back from that and maybe go a few years back when we had the global financial crisis, which equally was a big challenge at the time. And if I take from my personal experience, the company I was with, where we were moving into a new category of product, effectively I was setting up a new business at the time. We were 2 years into getting a new business up and running, and as is very often the case, it wasn't quite going to plan. So already we were into contingency planning. And therefore, I guess it's fair to say there was a certain mindset that you need to be ready to change and adjust at that time. But I think as the leadership, the important thing was to see the signs when the global financial crisis was upon us. Right. I remember sitting down with the team that I was working with at the time and saying, you know, we're picking up these vibes from 2 or 3 of our smaller customers, not the big customers, that this is what they think might happen. And how do we make sure that we are absolutely prepared for this? And since we're already in a semi-crisis mode, this could be in our advantage. So we actually looked at it in a very, very positive mindset. We rallied the troops, explained that this was an opportunity that we couldn't miss. And then it became about really communicating and meeting and planning consistently at a leadership level, even daily when things were really at their worst. Splitting responsibilities amongst the leadership team, not necessarily based on your core competence or your designation, but what your skills were and also your time availability. If one of your colleagues was in an area where they were overly stretched, well, can you take that on or support them and so on? That was really important. And through that, I think I learned, and something I've maintained subsequently throughout my working career in the last sort of 8-10 years since then, was how do you, I beg your pardon, dozen years since then, is to build leadership at every level of the organization. So at that time, the team that I was looking after was over 10,000 people, about 12,000 people. And we had a management team of about 700-800 people. So we created a rung of the senior leaders, obviously, the mid-management, and we then ran at the more junior level of executives of management, ran town halls so that all 700-800 people could see you and listen to you. And I think through these processes, being transparent and objective, being very open, not hiding anything, but being very objective about what it takes to win was super important. And then we came out of that in a good place, actually, whether we understood the customer needs. That was very, very important. And I think even in this current crisis, I know as we went into it in March, it was very much the same. Let's just watch the customer, make sure the customer feels this to the minimum. And in the earlier stages of the crisis, before it actually hit Sri Lanka hard, that was super important. We had supply chain issues very early with the East being impacted, and we had to deal with that. And eventually in the situation, if I jump back to the global financial crisis, the competition was definitely less well prepared and they wilted. And I think crises are opportunities to then capitalize on the competition wilting and eventually phasing back, because when you come out of it, eventually there's going to be great opportunities and, you know, build meaningful partnerships and so on. And in that business's case, in the post-crisis 6 to 8 years, we grew the business to about 5 times the size that it was pre-crisis, and with very, very strong financial performance. And I think, again, when you reflect on it, it was a combination of good strategic planning, a lot of flexibility, and then when the crisis came, take that as an opportunity and make the best of it. So I hope that gives you some perspective.
It does. Thank you so much, and that was quite insightful, Shirendra. So you do talk about strategy, and in fact, all the guests did talk about strategy. How do you get organizations to get their employees to buy in, and how do you get them to actually implement the same strategy, or to actually do what needs to be done? So there are 2 aspects to it. A, to believe in the strategy, to buy in, to strategy, and then B, to actually implement them and actually do them. So I'm just going to open this panel. I would love to hear the thoughts of each of you. So maybe who would like to go first? Or Shirendra, would you like to take a stab at it, or Selena?
Sorry, I can take that. Yeah.
Sure, and then we can go around the table. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the big word here is trust, because when you know that things are going wrong, everybody looks up to the leadership for guidance and support. And fair weather leaders are generally don't make it and survive through these sort of situations. And people will look up and say, look, you got us to a great place here. Things are tough. The leadership needs to be able to stand up and say, there is a situation. This is what the situation is. You need to have done your plan resetting, your strategy resetting, and you have to have done that and be able to stand up in front of those people and give them the comfort that though the weather is tough, they're in the best place and the safest place for this. So again, I mentioned communication earlier on. Communication is most important at times like this. It's interesting because with the current COVID situation, we have the whole advent of video conferencing. Everybody's had to, turbocharge their learning in this space, and most people using 3-4 platforms for this. So it's been done through tech a lot this time, and particularly because the unusuality of the COVID situation was that we actually couldn't move out of our houses. So in any other scenario, you'd been able to be physically together, and being physically together gives you a lot of comfort anyway. So I think the importance of being transparent and honest, I think by and large people respect that. Making sure that you build that trust, that you know what you're doing, and that we believe we have as good a chance or better than anyone of weathering this storm, and giving the troops that confidence. And I think that's the piece that makes the differentiator, that then you get the troops back into the trenches, and they're out there fighting the cause, trusting that you've made the best decisions for them at that time. So I think that would be my take on it.
I have got a question. First, I'm going to read it out. And so this is about all this imposing of the rules and regulations. What should be the strategy to drive the business forward? This question is actually directed to Shirendra about the way forward in this context.
Thanks, Sam. So maybe I just pick up from where Rajitha left off, but I absolutely endorse everything that he said. Spot on. And I think the in terms of that import export, and I mean our corporation is possibly the largest exporting organization as a conglomerate in the country. So it has obviously any legislation that is brought in that puts some challenges on that creates us challenges. I think we're respectful of the legislation that was imposed right at the onset of the crisis. There were certain blanket limitations put in place for exactly all the reasons that Rajitha talked to. I think the power of collaboration is what has really taken us beyond that. From the industry point of view, if you take our industry, the apparel organizations around the country, we come together through a number of different associations, and then there is an overall umbrella organization, JAF, Joint Apparel Associations Forum. And I think through the whole crisis, right from day one, everybody in the industry rallied together and turned to the leadership of the umbrella organizations and said, can we speak with the powers that be collectively? So we have been doing this actually as an industry through the whole crisis. There were lots of early issues to do with getting people back to work and so on and so forth, and keeping people safe, and that worked well. But as it came towards more latterly, and when the import restrictions came in, we did the same thing there. So the sort of the power of collaboration kicked in. We have the leadership of all of the larger, probably the top 6, 8, 10 companies sitting together there and going to speak with one voice. And
Right.
that then gave a lot of credibility to the process. And at the same time, at the government's level, the Board of Investment and the Export Development Board both have very, very dynamic proven business leaders at their helm, and they've worked collectively. So when we found we had issues, whether it was how to get people back to work, how do we overcome these limitations, how do we speak to the government and get them to understand the consequences, and then get the government to relook at the fine print and start editing that so that it achieves the overall objectives.
Right.
But at least in our case, allows us to bring raw materials in to get the export industry going. At the same time, introducing and controlling the payment cycle so that it minimizes the national cash flow implications. We've found that the different groups, whether it was as I said, the association groups, the government groups, have worked together really, really well. And I actually would go as far as to say it's probably the first time we've seen that level of collaboration across the different groups. So it's meant that even at a national level, if someone has to speak to another governmental organization, they have facilitated that and not passed it and palmed it down to us to say, well, you now need to go and talk to somebody else. So I endorse what Rajita said, that the way the leadership of the country has managed this has been outstanding. It's facilitated us in a very, very difficult and unpredictable situation to be able to work our way through it. And if you take the particular point that you just brought out, Sam, the limitations of import and export, there are still some restrictions that they're retaining. In fact, there was an update on the Gazette, I believe, issued just last week. That still keeps limitations on the payment cycle. So they're saying you can't just import saying it's for export and sit on it forever. It has to move through the system. And there are limits that have gone in, and it will possibly introduce a little bit of red tape. We're stuck with that because you then have to introduce systems to make it work. And I guess what we would hope is that that red tape then doesn't get in the way of actually making things happen. But net, I think the power of collaboration is everything. And yeah, absolutely endorse everything that Rajita said in terms of what's happening from the top, how the industry associations and I'm sure the other associations have worked similarly, and the organizations themselves have worked. Well, personally, I think Selena did a great job of summarizing for all of us. I don't know that there's anything more to say, because I think what she said, and we may not have focused on all that detail, is absolutely spot on. I think if I had to add something to that, first thing I would say is don't panic, right? I mean, we talked, and again, this comes down to how do you flush strategy luck through the system. Panic and remaining strong is very important. We as Sri Lankans are survivors. We've been through multiple crisis after crisis, tsunamis, conflict, social, political challenges, so on and so forth. And I think we're very resilient. And I think that resilience comes through our commitment, our optimism that we will always make the best of a situation, and by remaining focused and objective, and just not succumbing to panic. And I think I would just sort of add that to maybe as a means to the end rather than the end. But I think those were my final words. From me too, thanks for having me on the panel. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy being there, and yeah, great. Do it again sometime.
Well, with that, I'm afraid we're out of time, and we do come to a close of today's conversation on what makes a business successful. Is it strategy or luck, or a little bit of both? Once again, a huge thank you to our guests, Selena, Shirendra, and Rajita. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's been our pleasure, and a special thank you goes out to Sam, my co-host for today. Thank you very much, buddy, for being here, and the Luminary team, and to our audience who tuned in today. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your comments. Next week, we'll be speaking to the Senior Vice President, Human Resources at Fortune, Oshana Dias, the HR Director at CGG Group in Brazil, Gabriel Botelho, and the Managing Director at the World Pension Forum in South Africa, Chris Cohes. And we'll be talking about diversity and equality. Are we there yet? So don't forget to tune in next week. I'm Varun Chandramohan. Thank you for joining us today. See you next Saturday.